Chapter 1. Aiden's pickaxe struck firm against the stone cavern wall, which he had been mining for most of the day. Due to the large coal veins that had been recently located, he and many others were in this specific mine shaft for their last couple shifts. It wasn't the safest job one could have in the factories, but volunteers always got extra arcs as payment. Better to volunteer than be mandated by Captain Kellett without the extra pay. He continued to swing his pickaxe down for what seemed like an endless amount of hours, breaking off pieces of stone and coal. Through the day, prisoners that weren't mining would collect the coal and other useful materials to take them back to the refinery and forges. It was a hard day's work, but at least it was an honest living. Aiden was able to put food on the table for him and his mother, and their monthly dues were cheaper than normal thanks to his contract work in the factories. "So," said a tall man next to Aiden as he continued to strike his own pickaxe, "just a few more days until your contract is over. What are you going to do then?" "Honestly, I'm not really sure, Kryn," Aiden replied. "I've actually thought about leaving the city, maybe moving to a smaller village, just to kind of get away from everything." "You? Leave the city?" said Kryn with a surprised tone. "Never thought I'd hear those words come out of your mouth." "I mean, I think it's just about time, you know? I grew up in Torleth. I've never so much as even seen the outside of the city more than once or twice. And after working in the factories and mines for so long, it would do me some good to just leave for a while." "And you have the funds to do that?" "I've been putting arcs aside for a while now, at least enough to get me by for a year. That should buy me enough time to find some sort of job that doesn't include breathing in fumes and dirt." "Oh? And what does your mother think of that plan?" Aiden slammed his pickaxe into the wall with a bit more force than usual, obviously bothered by Kryn's statement. "She doesn't know," he replied. "Oh, I see. You've been hiding arcs from her, haven't you? Is that why you picked up so many volunteer shifts?" "Pretty much. She doesn't know I've been volunteering for extra arcs, but she doesn't need to know either." Aiden stopped swinging his pickaxe to take a small break. He looked at Kryn and could see sweat dripping from his bald head. It mixed with the soot and dirt that were naturally spread across their faces. While Aiden was one to wash up after a day's work, Kryn didn't do the same as often. He always claimed that he might as well bathe every few days, since they would just get equally as dirty the next shift. The two continued to work throughout the remainder of their shift. Sweat and fatigue grew strong, but it was something both Aiden and Kryn had been used to. The conversations they had were mainly routine, and often just used as a way to make the time pass quicker and to take their minds off of their bodies being beat down. As the day ended, the workers were free to leave. However, the prisoners would simply take their place in the shafts to continue mining for more coal and other useful materials they would find. The mines and factories of Torleth never stopped functioning thanks to the prisoner rehabilitation program that Lady Juliana put in place long ago. Unlike paid workers, the prisoners worked nearly around the clock. They didn't get much sleep, and most of which were very malnourished from the limited amount of food they were given in their cells. Aiden and the other workers laid down their pickaxes and started making their way through the cavern towards the lift. When they arrived at the platform, they waited for the lift to make its way down to them. Sounds of gears turning echoed through the chamber that got louder and louder. As it arrived, the gates opened to reveal about 20 prisoners. This was double the amount of workers that had been in the mines. However, due to their conditions, they were obviously not as effective at the job as the employees. The prisoners walked out as the workers walked in. Kryn closed the gate and pulled the lever to send the lift back up to the surface. "Wonder how many of them are actual criminals," said Kryn. "Hard to tell anymore, to be honest," Aiden replied. "At this rate, the officers would arrest someone for sneezing during one of Lady Juliana's speeches." "Well, I'd sneeze too if I was allergic to oligarchy and bullshit." Aiden and the rest of the crew in the lift chuckled. They didn't have much free time to speak openly and make jokes due to being monitored by officers during most of their shifts. However, the lifts were one place where the officers didn't monitor any workers. There was only one place any of the crew and prisoners could go, and that was up. Aiden, Kryn, and the rest of the workers continued to converse on their way up to the factories. The lift was only about a 5-minute trip, but it was 5 minutes of openly communicating without fear of being overheard. But just before any conversations could get too deep or too far in detail, the crew would find themselves at the top of the lift in the factory entrance. As they walked out of the steel lift, officers outside the gates pulled levers to stop the running of the engine. The smell of the factory itself was strong, almost intense enough as it felt like one's nostrils were burning from just inhaling. That was probably why most of the officers wore respirator like masks while on duty, but of course, those were just limited to officers and guards. While being a worker at the factories meant decent pay and relatively normal working hours, it still wasn't the safest occupation one could have. It was just one that guaranteed you could afford to live in the city. Aiden walked past many of the stations at the factory. As he walked, everyone else was finishing up their tasks for the day. The shift change was happening throughout the factory almost at the same time. In his opinion, many of the other jobs were worse off than the mines. Steel workers who poured metals into molds for weapons often suffered burns throughout the day. Lawyers often had sore and calloused hands from building various types of bows and arrows, while those who specialized in making ammunition for officer firearms sometimes suffered mixtures of both, due to working with steel and chemicals. There were roughly 200 workers that held occupations at the Torleth factory, all of whom were always relieved for their shifts to be over. "Well, I guess this is where we split for the night," Kryn said to Aiden as they walked through the factory gates amongst the crowd of workers. "I suppose so, but it'll only be a matter of hours before we're back here again," replied Aiden. "But for the love of Celestia, would you please bathe tonight? I'm not sure if I can handle your aura for another shift, especially because we're back in the mines tomorrow." Listen, water for the tankard at my place isn't cheap. If I can save a handful of arcs every week by only washing myself a few times, then I'm gonna keep doing that." Kryn had a smart aleck look on his face. "You've got to be the cheapest friend I have," Aiden said with a laugh. "Hey, they're my arcs and I can do what I want with them. As long as my dues are up to date, then the kingdom can kiss my ass. Plus, more arcs means more mead for me." Aiden shook his head and chuckled. "Suit yourself, then. I'm going to go home and clean up. Gotta get some dinner for my mother and I as well. Enjoy your aroma and mead." Aiden then walked off in a different direction of the city as he and Kryn gave each other a wave. The stone pathway turned more into gravel as he made his way through the city. He passed noble homes and the market district until he finally got to the Warrens of Torleth. It was late, but his usual place to grab dinner, Tinya's, was always open around this time. While it was a small tavern in the Warrens, it was always the best place to be after days like this. It always had a welcoming crowd and staff, and almost everyone knew each other as they mostly resided in the same area of the city. The tavern itself matched the overall aesthetic of the Warrens. It was an older wooden building with outdated signage and equipment, and made enough arcs to barely stand afloat. But the tavern was important to those who resided in this part of the city. Not many upper-class citizens and officers would travel to this part of Torleth. Aiden walked into the tavern. The door made a familiar creaking noise as it opened, alerting the staff that a patron had entered. It wasn't designed this way on purpose, but the metal hinges naturally rusted over time while the door warped slightly. As he walked in, about 10 patrons and some staff looked his way, all of which gave a familiar and friendly wave. Aiden approached the front of the bar. "Well, there he is," said a tall and larger woman behind the bar. "Was starting to wonder if you were coming in tonight, Aiden." "Yeah, I'm here. Took a little longer to wrap up at the factory today," replied Aiden. "How's business tonight, Tinya?" "Oh, it's about what you would expect," said Tinya. "Midway through the week and the same old crew that's usually here." "Well, at least things are consistent. Probably helps that you guys make the best meals in the Warrens, and actually still sell ale." "Oh, that definitely helps," Tinya chuckled. "So, anyways, what can I get you, Aiden? Picking up food for your mother, too?" "Yeah, just give me the usual. Just hold the carrots in mind." "Easy enough. Give me a few and I'll bring that out for you. By the way," Tinya smiled, "the beard is looking nice on you. Any reason for growing it out? Perhaps a special lady you're trying to impress?" Aiden laughed a bit. "No, just felt like doing something different. Figured it would actually make me look like I'm in my mid-20s. "Now, don't be too much in a rush to actually look your age. You are gifted with good genetics. One day you'll be wishing you actually look younger than you are." "Yeah, maybe one day," Aiden smirked. "But not today." "All right, sweetie. Whatever you say," Tinya replied with a playful laugh as she walked away to prepare Aiden's meal. Aiden turned in his chair, looking around the tavern. It was about half full tonight with people he mostly recognized. Some by name, some just regulars he'd seen around the Warrens. A few were playing a card game in the corner while sipping on ale, and others were simply eating with family and friends around the small fireplace at the southern wall of the building. May, another local, was trying her best to provide some ambiance in the building with her string rebec in a corner. It wasn't the best music one would hear, but it was the best she could work with given the condition of her instrument. After a few moments, Tinya appeared out of the back of the building with a small crate. Inside were two ceramic bowls with makeshift lids on them, with a small bread loaf wrapped in paper on the side. All right, 2 bowls of potato soup and 1 loaf of horse bread, Tinya said. Aiden put a few more arcs on the counter. Thanks, Tinya. I'll be sure to bring the crate and bowls back tomorrow on my way back to the factory. Oh, I know. You're very good about that. Some folks, on the other hand, she glared at the group playing cards at the table, seem to not have the best memory about the rules around here. Well, at least they make up for the cost of bowls and crates with how often they drink, chuckled Aiden. But, we appreciate it. Helps keep the costs down so we can keep coming back. I do my best. But about that, Tinya sighed with a hint of shame. I'm going to need 2 more arcs for your meal tonight. Oh? Said Aiden with a surprised look. What's going on? Aiden pulled out his pouch of arcs again to compensate. Tinya had a saddened look on her face. The city raised my monthly dues again. A while ago, actually. I've been trying to make up for it the best that I can without raising prices, but I don't really have a choice now. I'm sorry, Aiden. You don't need to apologize, Tinya. Aiden laid down 2 more arcs. You've done your best to take care of us, so we'll take care of you. I appreciate that, Aiden, Tinya said as she took the arcs. Just hate raising prices of things, but I'm definitely not one suited for the factory life. She laughed a bit as she patted her belly. Well, luckily for you, you've got a great community surrounding you. We wouldn't let that happen. A few extra arcs for a decent meal at a late hour is more than worth it. Aiden grabbed his crate of food. But anyways, I should probably get home now. I'll see you soon, Tinya. Aiden proceeded to leave the tavern, giving a wave to Tinya. She waved back with a smile on her face. Aiden eventually arrived at home, only a few minutes' walk from Tinya's through the Warrens. His home was small, but worked as a place to at least get a night's rest. But that was about it. He didn't get much peace or privacy at home because of his mother. He opened the door, which usually always got stuck and required a small shove to get open. As he entered, the smell of the house hit him instantly. Almost a damp smell, mixed with an odor of trash. His mother was sitting in her usual place, on a small, worn-down couch reading a book. She usually didn't do much more than just that. Hey, Ma, said Aiden as he walked through the door. I brought us some food from Tinya's. He proceeded to take off his boots, after finding a place for them amongst the miscellaneous boxes and household items scattered throughout the home. I see. That's why you're home so late, said Aiden's mother with a slightly angered tone. Well, yeah, I had to wait for the food to be done. I had a long day. I'm just too tired to cook something tonight. Aiden proceeded to make his way around the corner of the door to their dining area. So rather than cook something, you spent arcs on food someone else made. I honestly wonder how you keep that job with how lazy you are. Aiden's mother nearly always spoke in a harsh tone, one that was hard to forget, one that made some uneasy just by listening to her. Aiden gripped the crate he carried with frustration as he placed the food on the table. He paused as he took a breath. The smell from the house was worse in the dining area. There had been trash in a bin. It was full and reeked of food and other types of trash that had been collected during the day while he was gone. He then placed the bowls of soup with the bread on the table and grabbed some spoons. Aiden then sat down and began to have his dinner. So are you going to bring me mine, or am I just going to starve for the night? Said Aiden's mother with the same harsh tone. Aiden sighed to himself, then silently walked over and handed his mother her bowl and a piece of the bread. He handed it off and turned to walk back to the table. And take the trash out when you're done eating. I've been smelling it all day, she said. Aiden silently sat back down. Didn't think you noticed the smell since you sit in it all day, he said under his breath. What was that now? Nothing, Ma. I'll get it taken care of when I'm done, he replied. Aiden's mother gave him a scornful look, but then started eating her soup and bread. They ate in silence with little conversation. This exchange of words was regular for when Aiden usually came home from the factory. and on days where he was not working and decided to simply leave the house, things were no different. As of every time he was gone, his mother would come up with some reason to scorn him or accuse him of doing things she didn't approve of. It was as if no matter what he did, where he went, or what he said, he was always wrong. Aiden and his mother finished their meals in silence. Aiden took the empty bowls and cleaned them out to return to the crate, and threw away any remaining scraps away into the already overflowing garbage. There were very few words exchanged between them in the meantime. Aiden tied a knot atop the paper trash bag with some twine, and proceeded to take it out into the corner of the house. When he returned inside, his mother spoke out. "Aiden, just reminding you that the dues for the month are being collected tomorrow," she said in the same usual tone. "Yeah, Ma, I know," Aiden replied with a tired sigh. "I'm dropping the Arcs off tomorrow after I take Tinya her crate back." Aiden's mother, of course, had to remind him of their monthly dues. She always did, despite Aiden knowing when they were due and was always on time with them. Aiden was in charge of nearly everything in the home, from the dues, the food, cleaning, and more. Not that it was any problem if he was living on his own, but his mother didn't make any of the tasks easy, especially because she never seemed to contribute to anything in the house itself. "Well, don't forget," his mother said. "I know you like to forget things. This is exactly why you'll never make it on your own. Can't even remember to take the trash out, let alone make sure our living expenses are paid for." She still spoke in the same harsh and almost cruel tone. Aiden finally snapped. "Forget things? I don't forget things, Mother. Sometimes I get overwhelmed with everything going on because I'm the only one who works, cleans, prepares meals, and everything else around here." Aiden clenched his fists in anger. "Do you ever think that maybe I wouldn't be as stressed and overwhelmed if you maybe just finally started helping? I cannot remember the last time you've worked or did anything to contribute to living." He continued to show more tense emotions, clenching his fists even more. Aiden wasn't a confrontational person. It took a lot for him to really snap. "I'm sorry. What did you just say to me?" His mother replied as she closed her book and stood up. She walked up to him, nearly face to face. They were both relatively short, his mother a few inches shorter than Aiden. However, despite her being smaller, there was something intimidating about her, something that caused Aiden to almost cower. "Do you really think you can talk to me like this? After everything I've done for you?" She got even closer to him, uncomfortably close. "Ma, I'm sorry. It's been a long day. I'm just tired. I didn't mean to say any of that." Aiden's anger quickly turned into fear. His heart was racing, and he felt almost lightheaded. Anytime he spoke how he felt, this was the same type of reaction he would receive from his mother. Something about her caused panic in Aiden. It had always been this way. "You want to hit me, don't you?" she said with an awkward smile. "Then come on, then. Hit me. You have the nerve to speak to me in a disrespectful tone. Then surely you must have enough guts to hit me." She kept pressing forward, nearly putting her forehead against Aiden's face as she continued to speak, still in the vicious tone she always used. Aiden held back tears. No, I would never do that. You raised me better than that. You're my mother, and I would never lay a hand on you," he said with a shaky voice. "You're a good mom. I just need to learn to do better." His mother smiled, almost with satisfaction, as Aiden submitted to her. "As you should," she said as she then wrapped her arms around Aiden for a tight and uncomfortable hug. "Just remember, I've always been the only one actually here for you. I'll always be in your corner. All we need is each other, and we'll be just fine." It was as if her mood immediately changed once Aiden gave into her pressure. Her tone dropped from the harsh and intimidating one to a more soothing and actual mother-like feeling. But that was perhaps even more uncomfortable for Aiden. Seconds before, she was tempting him to hit her, and immediately afterwards consoling him. Tears ran down his face from the mixture of emotions, the combination of fear, confusion, and more that he could not explain. "I should really get some rest," said Aiden as he separated from his mother's hug. "I need to be up early and all, to take the crate to Tinya's and drop the dues off." "Oh, yes you should. Please, son, get some rest. I know you have a long day tomorrow." His mother smiled and sat back in her chair. Aiden then walked past the couch and turned into his room. He grabbed some night clothes and bathed himself in their washroom. The water in their wooden tub was cold, and somewhat dirty, as Aiden only had time to refill it from the wells about twice a week. But it was good enough to at least wash some of the soot and debris off of him. He kept his bathing quick and went to his room, closing the door behind him. Aiden sat on his bed and finally let the feelings out that he'd been trying his best to hold back. He had to keep any noises he made from crying silent, as almost everything he did or said could be heard throughout the home. If his mother heard him, then her reaction would be anything from being scolded and threatened to him just receiving more uncomfortable soothing. He had learned the hard way throughout the years. Eventually, he was able to compose himself a bit and lay in his bed to try to get some rest. The bed was small and somewhat uncomfortable, but at least it made do. However, as he laid, his mind still did race. Thoughts that he tried to shut away but still always came to him. Aiden hated his mother. In all honesty, he did want to hit her. He knew that she tempted him with violence because if he were to hit her, it would certainly result in a sentence at the factories, but not as a worker. He was confused as usual as to why his mother was like this. She was cruel, but then presented a fake sense of caring when she got what she wanted. In the public eye, the few times she would see others out, she would always have a facade of a loving and caring mother who raised her son on her own, always telling people that her son was such a good person, and the man of the home. She put him on such a high pedestal to other people, but behind closed doors she would scold, scorn, and verbally degrade him. The most confusing part of it all is Aiden did not understand why. She claimed she did so much for him through the years, but he never really knew what she meant by that. All he knew is that his father allegedly left her when he was a child for a younger maiden from Olinar. Since then, it was mainly just Aiden and his mother. He did have a sister, but he didn't see much of her. At a young age, she was sent to a prestigious private academy in Oligrave, and only really came around once a year or so. He had started working side jobs around the Warrens when he was only 14, so he could help with paying dues, and for his sister's schooling. When he was of a permitted age, he then got a job at the factories. Since then, his mother stopped working outright, since Aiden could then take care of the dues on his own. Her tone was one that he heard almost all of his life. That same harsh, nasty, and cynical tone. It was as if he was trained in a way to react a certain way to it, like a dog being trained to stop misbehaving. As unfortunate as it was, his mother had control of him. He was a grown man in his mid-20s by now, and made enough arcs to survive on his own, and honestly save more if it was not for his mother. However, internally he felt some sort of obligation to stay. He felt that if he were to leave his mother and be on his own, then he would be betraying her. But most importantly, he feared what she would actually do if he were to go out on his own. He didn't know what exactly that she could do, would do, or even had the opportunity to do, but the fear still lingered over him, a fear that would shut him down emotionally and mentally for years on end. Aiden was trapped by his fear, panic, and emotions that haunted him for years upon years. He claimed he was putting arcs behind to leave once his contract at the factory was up, but the question was if he had the bravery to actually follow through with it. He had practiced what he was going to say to his mother multiple times, but each time he only imagined the type of emotional retaliation she would have at the thought of him even leaving. She didn't want him to leave. She simply wanted control, and he didn't know why. And unfortunately for Aiden, it worked. After some time of these thoughts running through his head, he soon passed out from not only physical, but mental exhaustion to at least get some rest for the next day. This was Aiden's home life, nearly every night for as long as he could remember. For years, Aiden had said he was going to leave, to get away from everything, to get as far away from his mother as he could. The question now was what would be the breaking point to where he actually would leave. Aiden awoke the next day and ran through his usual morning routine. He got ready to go to the factory, packed up the crate and an envelope of arcs to turn in their dues. His mother asked when he would be home, and he of course said he would be back around the usual time. There wasn't much more conversation between them in the mornings. He left his house and dropped the crate off at Tinya's. He made his way east towards the factory, stopping at one of the local Reeve offices to turn in their dues, and then making his way to the factory to begin his day. He approached the gates of the factory where Kryn awaited him at their usual meeting place. They gave each other a friendly nod and made small talk as he entered and got prepared for their shift. They were in the mines again today, as were the last of Aiden's shifts before his contract ended. It would make for a very tiring couple of days, but the extra pay would be nice and give him a good head start if he actually did follow through with leaving home. Aiden, Kryn, and the rest of the workers walked throughout the factory approaching their stations for the day. Some split in different directions, heading towards the smithing and constructing areas. Others were on transport duties with the prisoners, and the rest headed towards the mines. The lift sended the workers down once again, and they this time traded places with the prisoners that had replaced them the previous shift. There wasn't much progress done through the night, as the prisoners were much weaker and malnourished than the normal workers. At the end of the line of prisoners, 2 guards were carrying a body into the lift following them. One of the prisoners had died through the night. Whether it was from being malnourished or just from the extended exposure of fumes that they inhaled, it was hard to tell. The prison cells were connected to the factories, so their exposure was much more prevalent than the average officer or worker. There was an awkward silence through the mine shaft as the body was carried into the lift and dropped by the officers. They left the body with the prisoners, leaving it to the officers up top to take care of. The workers turned in silence and began to get to work. Hours passed of the usual conversations they would have. The sharp piercing of pickaxes rang consistently through the cavernous area. Hands began to callous and become sore. Sweat quickly formed amongst all of them, and breathing got harder as they inhaled fumes. It didn't make things easier, but at least being used to it, they knew what to expect from these shifts. Aiden's pickaxe struck firm against the stone cavern wall. However, this time, his pickaxe made contact with something different than the slate and stone he had been wearing down. What looked like clear shards of something broke off of whatever he hit. Rocks and dirt crumbled around what he struck, revealing something he had never seen before in his life. "Is that?" said Kryn as he looked over at what Aiden struck. "I think it might be," replied Aiden. Both Kryn and himself stood hovering over this odd ore that Aiden had struck. It had a translucent color to it, with a very light glow. Most people had known of this ore, but had never actually seen any of it. As far as everyone knew, all sources of Arcanveil had been under possession of Celestian rulers, locked away in keeps and kept away from the public. "Kryn, help me dig this out," said Aiden as he started moving the dirt and stone away with his hands. Kryn nodded and began to help. They were quickly able to dig away enough of the dirt and stone to get a full view of the ore in the cavern wall. It was large and obviously connected to more of its own material that traveled deeper into the mines. "Aiden, that's Arcanveil. It has to be," said Kryn with enthusiasm. "If that's really Arcanveil, then can you imagine how we'll be rewarded?" On top of taking extra pay for working the mines, the workers had also been informed that if they found anything of interest or unique, to report it to Captain Kellitz. If so, they would be rewarded graciously. This was it. While Aiden was working in the mines for extra arcs to make it on his own for a while, he knew his funds wouldn't last as long as he wished. But with the discovery of what they believed to be Arcanveil, this would ensure Aiden would have much more to live off of. More arcs meant more opportunity. Aiden stood in silence, nearly in a form of shock. Aiden," said Kryn. "You okay?" "Yeah. I just can't believe it. The timing of all of this." Aiden paused for a moment. "This has to be a sign. My contract is up in just 2 days, and now we find this. Just in time before I retire from the factories for good." "You're damn right it's a sign," replied Kryn. "A sign that we're going to be swimming in arcs. Keep an eye on that. I'm grabbing the officers so we can report this to Kellitz." Aiden nodded, and Kryn ran off down the mine. Others noticed the commotion that Kryn had been causing in their area of the cavern. They quickly swarmed around the area around Aiden to get a look at what the two had found. Aiden was kneeled on the ground, just a foot or so away from the ore. As the rest of the crew surrounded, they quickly began to converse in surprise at what had been found. Some of them spoke to Aiden directly, asking him how they found this. However, all these voices sounded muffled to Aiden, drowned out by something. He wasn't focused on the others, the caves, or the factory. He hadn't been thinking about his mother or even leaving. All he was focused on was the ore of Arcanveil. It was mesmerizing, and he couldn't take his eyes off of it. For the first time, his mind was clear of all worry he ever had. But more importantly, there was something else. It was as if somehow, in an unexplainable way, he felt connected to the Arcanveil itself.